so much!
I thought the panda was dying. That was the first thing that hit me when I turned the corner with a bundle of fresh bamboo in my arms and saw Bao sitting in the far back corner of her enclosure like a stone somebody had left there overnight. She was not chewing. She was not shifting her weight. She was not even looking toward the gate where I always came in. A giant panda can look calm even on a busy day, but this was different. This was the kind of stillness that makes your stomach drop before your mind has time to explain why. It was just after sunrise, and the zoo was waking up in the same familiar way it always did. The service road behind the exhibits was wet from the morning washdown. I could hear a cart rattling somewhere near the hoofstock barns. A keeper from the birdhouse laughed at something over the radio. The air smelled like hose water, disinfectant, hay, and the sweet green snap of bamboo. Usually that routine settled me. That morning it made everything feel worse, because the whole place sounded normal while one part of it suddenly did not. Belle always heard me before she saw me. Most mornings, by the time I reached the outer gate, she was already moving across the habitat, slow but purposeful, nose lifted, waiting for breakfast like we were keeping an appointment. She had her habits, and I had learned every one of them. She liked the thicker bamboo first. She liked to sit with her back against the low rock near the climbing logs. If I spoke to her while I set down the bundles, she would glance over once, almost politely, before tearing into the leaves. That morning I said her name softly through the mesh. Bao. Nothing. I set the bamboo down, unlocked the keeper's side gate, and stepped into the service section just outside the main habitat barrier. I watched her closely. Her chest rose and fell. Good. She was breathing evenly. But she still did not turn toward me. Bao, come on, girl. I hated how small my voice sounded. Usually she would at least flick an ear. This time she stayed folded into herself, head low, eyes half open, as if something heavy had settled over her in the night. I reached for the radio clipped to my vest and called for Nate, the morning vet on rounds. I need you at Panda Habitat now, I said. Something is off. On my way, he answered, calm as ever. Those 2 minutes waiting for him stretched longer than they should have. I kept talking to her, the way you do when you are trying to keep panic from taking over. You are okay. I am right here. Just look at me once. Still nothing. I checked the rest of the enclosure with my eyes. No sign of a fall. No broken branches. No blood. Water basin full. Night logs from the previous shift showed nothing unusual. Ate a moderate dinner. Normal stool. Rested in upper den area around midnight. By paper, everything had been fine. Nate came fast, carrying his med bag and wearing that expression zoo vets get when they are already sorting through 10 possible explanations before they reach the animal. He stood beside me at the barrier and watched Bao in silence. How long has she been like this? He asked. I just got here, I said. She was already sitting like that. Any vomiting, loose stool, signs of injury in the overnight notes? No. Nothing. He crouched slightly, angling for a better look. Then he asked me to bring a small piece of apple and one of her favorite bamboo shoots. We tried the easy things first. Scent. Voice. Familiar routine. No reaction. Nate asked for permission over the radio to do a closer visual from the secondary side. By then another keeper had come to help with the gates. When we moved around to get a different angle, Bao finally lifted her head a little. For 1 second I felt relief. Then I saw her face. Not sick in an obvious way. Not injured. Just blank. Tired. Withdrawn. Nate stayed quiet for a long moment. I do not like this, I said. Neither do I, he answered. He observed her movement when she slowly adjusted one paw. No limp. No sign of neurological distress. Her breathing remained steady. Her eyes tracked us, but only barely. We decided not to force anything right away. A stressed panda can shut down even more if pushed too hard, and if there was pain we did not want to make it worse. The next hour turned into a blur of careful steps. We reviewed camera footage from the night room. Bao had moved normally during the night. She had climbed down, paced once, sat, changed positions, and then near dawn she had simply stopped engaging. Nate arranged for blood work later if she would shift into the holding area. I refreshed her food. I cleaned what I could from the keeper's side. I kept glancing over, hoping to catch some small sign of her old rhythm returning. Nothing. By late morning, word had spread among the staff who worked that section. People kept their distance, but I saw them looking. Bao was one of those animals everyone cared about, even if they had never worked directly with her. Maybe it was because she looked gentle. Maybe it was because she had that quiet way of making you slow down when you were around her. Around noon, I found Lena from admin standing by the service path with a clipboard tucked to her chest. How bad is it? She asked. I do not know yet, I said. That is the worst part. She hesitated, then said something that made me turn fully toward her. Do you think this has anything to do with May being transferred? I stared at her. Why would you ask me that now? Because the timing is strange, Lena said. And because Bao has not been the same since the other enclosure went empty. I wish I could say she was wrong. May had been moved a few weeks earlier to another accredited facility as part of a breeding and habitat management program. They had not shared one space, but the two pandas had lived in neighboring enclosures for years. They smelled each other every day. Heard each other. Watched each other move through the same routine. We all knew giant pandas are solitary by nature, and nobody in our department would pretend they were like wolves or elephants. But solitary does not mean unaware. Solitary does not mean untouched by absence. That thought stayed with me all afternoon. When my shift should have ended, I did not leave. I sat on an overturned feed bucket in the keeper corridor where Bao could see me if she wanted to. I did not crowd her. I did not call her name every 5 minutes. I just stayed there while the zoo closed to visitors and the noise dropped away. As the light changed, she finally stood up. I was on my feet so fast I almost knocked the bucket over. Come on, Bao, I whispered. Yes. Good. She took a few slow steps toward the bamboo pile. Lowered her head. Sniffed. Then she turned away. I felt that in my chest more than I can explain. Nate came back for an evening check and found me still there. Did she eat anything? He asked. Not one bite, I said. He looked at Bao, then at the untouched bamboo, then back at me. We will monitor overnight. If she still refuses in the morning, we intervene more aggressively. I nodded, but I barely heard the rest. Because all I could see was a panda who had walked right up to food she normally loved and chosen nothing. Before I left, I stood by the barrier one last time. The enclosure lights had come on. Bao was back in the corner again, not asleep, just sitting there in the half-glow. I said goodnight to her the way I always did, even though it felt useless. She did not move. Driving home, I kept replaying the day in pieces. The stillness. The empty look in her face. The way she turned from the bamboo. Nate saying there was no obvious injury. Lena mentioning May. All of it came together into one thought I did not want to think, because once you say it in your head, it becomes real enough to scare you. What if Bao was not fighting an illness at all? What if she was giving up? And when I came back the next morning, the first thing I saw was the breakfast from the night shift still lying where they had placed it. Untouched. The next morning I walked faster than usual from the parking lot to the service gate. I already knew what I was afraid to see. When an animal refuses food once, you worry. When it happens twice, the worry settles somewhere deeper. The night shift had left a short note in the keeper log. Bao barely moved. No food taken. Water level slightly lower but not enough to be meaningful. Sat in the same area most of the night. I stood for a moment outside the enclosure before unlocking the gate. Bao was exactly where she had been the evening before, sitting with her back partly toward the open space, her body rounded and still. "Good morning, Bao." My voice sounded forced even to me. I placed fresh bamboo near the rock she usually liked and stepped back. The leaves were bright and crisp. Normally the sound of bamboo hitting the ground would make her turn instantly. She did not move. Nate arrived a few minutes later carrying coffee in one hand and his medical bag in the other. He did not waste time with small talk. He studied Bao for a long moment. "Any change?" he asked. "No food since yesterday morning." He sighed quietly and leaned on the rail. "Physically she still looks stable. No swelling, no sign of trauma. Breathing steady." "Then why does she look like that?" I said. He did not answer right away. "Sometimes animals shut down after a change in their environment," he finally said. "You mean stress?" "Yes. But not just stress. Something closer to withdrawal." I knew what he was hinting at even before he said it clearly. "Since May left?" I asked. "Possibly." He explained something I had heard before but never paid much attention to. Giant pandas are solitary in the wild, but they are not unaware of the animals around them. When two individuals live in neighboring habitats for years, they grow used to each other's presence. Sounds. Smells. Movement. Remove that suddenly and some animals react. "Most adjust quickly," he said. "Some take longer. And some stop eating," I finished. He looked at me and gave a small nod. We watched Bao for another few minutes. She shifted her weight once and slowly lowered her head, but she still ignored the bamboo. "We will keep monitoring," Nate said. "Try to keep her routine normal." Normal. That word felt strange that morning. After he left, I pulled a plastic stool from the keeper corridor and sat down where Bao could see me through the mesh barrier. At first I did not even know what I planned to do. I just sat there. The zoo opened to visitors an hour later. I could hear distant footsteps and children's voices drifting across the pathways. A few people stopped at the panda habitat and looked in, whispering to each other. Bao barely reacted. One of the junior keepers walked by and stopped when she saw me sitting there. "You okay, Marla?" "Yeah. Just keeping an eye on her." She looked toward Bao and frowned. "She has been like that all morning. Since yesterday." The keeper hesitated. "Do you want coffee or something?" I shook my head. "I think I will stay here a while." When she left, the quiet returned. I leaned back slightly and spoke toward the enclosure. "You know I am not very interesting company, Bao." Her ear twitched. It was such a small movement I almost thought I imagined it. I tried again. "You remember the thick bamboo from yesterday? I brought the same kind today." Still nothing. An idea came to me that probably looked ridiculous from the outside. I pulled a small paperback book from my bag. It was something I had been reading during lunch breaks. I opened it and started reading out loud. Not loudly. Just enough so the sound carried across the enclosure. At first it felt awkward. But after a few minutes the rhythm of the words filled the empty space. I did not know if Bao understood anything about the sounds. That was not the point. The point was that the enclosure no longer felt silent. Hours passed like that. Sometimes I stopped reading and talked to her about small things. The weather. The new bamboo shipment. A raccoon that had somehow gotten into the storage building last week. Around midday I noticed something. Bao had shifted slightly closer to the open part of the habitat. Not much. Maybe the length of her own body. But it was the first real movement she had made toward the center of the enclosure since yesterday. That tiny change gave me more energy than a full night of sleep. "Good girl," I said softly. The next morning I came even earlier. Before the sun had fully risen. I brought fresh bamboo again and sat in the same place with the same book. This time Bao lifted her head sooner. She looked toward me. Not past me. Not through me. Directly at me. For a moment the two of us just stayed like that. A keeper sitting on a plastic stool and a giant panda watching from the far side of the habitat. Something about that eye contact felt important. Like a door cracking open a little. Over the next few days the pattern repeated. I arrived early. I sat near the enclosure. I talked. Sometimes I read. Other keepers started joking about my morning story time with the panda, but none of them told me to stop. Slowly Bao began moving more. One morning she stood up while I was speaking. Another morning she walked halfway across the habitat before sitting down again. Then one afternoon something happened that made my hands shake. Bao walked all the way to the mesh barrier where I was standing. She stopped a few feet away and looked at me quietly. Her eyes did not look empty anymore. They looked tired, but aware. I slowly picked up one thick bamboo shoot from the pile beside me and held it out through the feeding gap. I did not move closer. I just waited. Bao lowered her head, sniffed the air, and took one careful step forward. Another step. Then she reached out with her paw and gently pulled the bamboo from my hand. For the first time in days I heard the familiar crunch of bamboo breaking between her teeth. I laughed out loud before I realized I was doing it. "You stubborn girl," I said. Behind me someone cleared their throat. I turned and saw the zoo director standing on the path with Lena from administration. He had been watching for a minute. "That is encouraging," he said. I nodded, still watching Bao chew slowly. "Yes. It is." He exchanged a glance with Lena. "Good timing," he said. "Because the board will be discussing Bao's future very soon." Those words made the small moment of relief feel suddenly fragile again. The change did not happen in one dramatic moment, it happened in small steps that only someone watching every day would notice. A week earlier Bao had barely moved across the habitat, now she began greeting the morning before I even set the bamboo down, and that simple change made the entire enclosure feel different. When I walked through the keeper gate with the bundles in my arms, she lifted her head almost immediately and slowly pushed herself to her feet, stretching her heavy body the way pandas do when they are waking into a new day. "Good morning, Bao," I said while placing the bamboo near the rock she preferred. She moved toward it without hesitation, which still felt like a small miracle after the days when she refused to touch anything. The sound of bamboo breaking between her teeth echoed through the enclosure, a steady crunch that I had missed more than I realized. I leaned on the rail and watched her chew, feeling the quiet relief that only keepers understand, because progress with animals rarely arrives in big victories, it comes in slow and patient signs that tell you the fight is not over. Other staff began noticing it too. One morning Lena stopped beside the path while Bao was walking across the habitat, and she looked surprised in the way people do when they were preparing themselves for something worse. "She looks stronger today," Lena said. "She is eating again," I answered. Lena watched Bao for a moment and then looked back at me. "You have been spending a lot of time here." I shrugged a little. Someone has to talk to her. The truth was that my routine had changed completely. I arrived earlier than anyone else in the department, often before the sun cleared the trees behind the veterinary building. I would sit on the plastic stool near the barrier, open my book, and read while Bao moved slowly around the habitat. Sometimes she listened quietly, sometimes she ignored me and climbed the low logs, and sometimes she simply sat a few yards away watching in that calm, thoughtful way pandas have when they are deciding whether a situation is worth their attention. The strange thing was that the more ordinary our mornings became, the more I felt something shifting between us. Bao began approaching the barrier more often, not only when I held food but when I was simply standing there. She would stop a short distance away and look at me with steady eyes that no longer carried the distant emptiness I had seen the first day. One afternoon Nate joined me during his rounds and leaned on the rail beside me while Bao slowly worked through a pile of bamboo leaves. "You know," he said quietly, "she is moving like herself again." I nodded. "She even waits for me now." Nate smiled slightly. "You might have become part of her routine." That thought stayed with me the rest of the day, because routine means safety for many animals, and if Bao saw my presence as something predictable and calm, then perhaps she no longer felt as alone as she had during those silent days. A few mornings later something happened that none of us expected. I had just finished placing fresh bamboo near the feeding area when Bao walked toward the mesh barrier where I was standing. She stopped closer than usual, close enough that I could see the small scars on her nose and the faint dust on her thick fur. For a moment she studied me, her dark eyes calm but alert, and then she did something I had never seen her do before. She rose slowly onto her hind legs. The movement was heavy but controlled, the way a panda balances its weight when reaching for something higher. Her front paws came up against the metal mesh, and suddenly she was standing upright with her face level to mine, separated only by the barrier that had always defined the space between keeper and animal. For a second I forgot to breathe. Bao remained there, her paws resting against the metal bars, her head slightly tilted as if she was examining me from a new angle. From the outside it might have looked like a simple movement, but standing that close to an animal that powerful makes you aware of every detail, the strength in her shoulders, the slow rhythm of her breathing, the quiet intelligence in her eyes. Behind me I heard someone whisper. I turned my head slightly and realized that two other keepers and Nate had stopped along the service path, watching the moment unfold. Bao stayed upright for several seconds, her paws pressing gently against the mesh, and in that strange stillness it almost felt as if she were leaning forward the way people do when they embrace someone through a fence. "Hey there, girl," I said softly. My voice sounded calm, although my heart was racing. After a moment Bao dropped back onto all fours and calmly reached for the bamboo lying near the barrier. She pulled a stalk closer and began chewing again, as if nothing unusual had happened. The others behind me were still staring. "Did she just hug the fence?" one of the keepers said quietly. Nate let out a breath and shook his head with a small smile. "I think that might be the closest thing you will ever see to a panda greeting someone." The moment spread through the staff faster than I expected. By the afternoon several people had stopped by the habitat just to see Bao moving around again, and each time she crossed the enclosure I felt the same quiet pride that comes when an animal you care about finds its strength again. But the calm did not last long. Later that day Lena approached me while I was finishing the feeding log. She held a folder in her hands and her expression was serious in a way that made me uneasy before she even spoke. "The board finished the review this morning," she said. "Review of what?" I asked. "Bao." I straightened slowly. What about her? Lena hesitated for a moment, as if choosing the right words. They want to move her to the Mountain Conservation Reserve in Colorado. The sentence landed heavier than I expected. The reserve she mentioned was a large protected habitat where several pandas from different facilities lived in a more natural environment, and from a conservation standpoint it was considered one of the best places an animal like Bao could go. Still, the thought of the enclosure without her felt suddenly strange. When would that happen? I asked. Soon, Lena said quietly. The transport team is already preparing the paperwork. I looked through the mesh toward Bao, who was sitting comfortably in the grass chewing the last of the bamboo. A few minutes earlier she had been standing at the fence, looking at me with that calm, curious expression that had taken weeks to return. Now I realized something that made the moment bittersweet. Just when Bao had finally begun trusting me again, just when she had started greeting the mornings with the same calm strength she once had, the time had come for me to step out of her world. And I knew that sooner or later I would have to say goodbye. The days before Bao's transfer felt unusual, as if time slowed inside the panda habitat while the rest of the zoo moved normally. I arrived early every morning with fresh bamboo, unlocking the keeper gate while the air still carried the quiet of dawn. Bao had started waiting near the center of the enclosure again, and when she saw me she lifted her head and walked toward the feeding area with that calm rolling step pandas have when they feel safe. I kept the routine simple. I placed bamboo near her favorite rock, cleaned the water basin, and wrote quick notes in the feeding log while she ate. The familiar rhythm seemed to calm both of us. Bao chewed slowly and watched me from time to time while I spoke to her about small things around the zoo, almost as if she were another keeper starting the shift beside me. One morning Nate stood beside me while Bao finished a stalk of bamboo. Transport team confirmed the schedule, he said quietly. 2 more days. I nodded. How is she looking medically? Better than before. Eating well. Calm behavior. He paused. You helped with that. I looked at Bao and shook my head a little. She helped herself. Later the transport drivers arrived to inspect the loading area and the reinforced crate waiting in the holding building. One of them, Daniel, asked how she responded to guidance. Slow but cooperative, I told him. She follows food. Good, he said. Calm animals travel easier. That evening I stayed near the enclosure after most visitors had left. Bao lay on the grass while the last light faded behind the trees. You are going to like that mountain air, I told her quietly. She lifted her head slightly and then settled again. The morning of the transfer came quickly. I arrived before sunrise carrying the freshest bamboo I could find. Bao was already awake, sitting near the center of the enclosure and watching the gate. Good morning, Bao. She stood and walked toward me. The rest of the staff arrived quietly. Nate checked her movement one last time while Lena handled paperwork. The transport team positioned the crate near the holding gate. When everything was ready I guided Bao toward the corridor with a bundle of bamboo. She followed slowly and calmly. Then she stopped. She turned and walked back to the fence where I was standing. Bao came close, lifted herself onto her hind legs, and placed her paws against the mesh just as she had done before. Standing there she looked directly at me, calm and steady. I placed my hand against the metal from my side. Take care of yourself, girl. After a moment she dropped back down, turned, and walked through the corridor into the transport crate where fresh bamboo waited. The door closed and the track carried her away beyond the zoo gates. Weeks passed, then months. The zoo returned to its usual rhythm, but every time I walked past the empty habitat I remembered the mornings when Bao waited by the gate. One autumn afternoon Lena handed me a small envelope from the reserve. Inside was a photograph. Bao stood on a green hillside with several other pandas exploring the grass around her. She looked strong and calm, completely at home. I placed the photo beside the keeper log and smiled. Sometimes helping an animal does not mean keeping it close. Sometimes it means giving it the chance to belong where it truly should be.